Thank you, Mayan, Himanshu, Jeremy, Fion, sorry, and Valence. Just to let you guys know who we are. I don't think I need to tell you guys why governance is important for successful AI deployment and adoption. I mean, the word governance, you probably heard it multiple times today. In fact, I actually liked what Eric Morrow from RBC said BMO said it today at an early presentation at actually a banking panel that his future of AI is actually about agentic AI, but also responsible AI, and in particular, transparency and explainability. However, many times when you bring up the word governance, what we also hear that it's actually a tax on innovation, and we want to move fast and furiously and build really cool stuff. But at the same time, we do need to balance this rapid innovation and deployment with doing stuff right, with governance. So how do we do that? Where is that balance? Especially if you think about the corporate pressures, as competitive pressures that may incentivize actually leaning towards speed. So what do we think, guys? Where do we stand? Where is that balance? Jeremy, do you want to start us off?
Sure, sounds good. So from my standpoint, it's not really a binary choice, right? It's really how do we address it. Speed for the matter of speed is just generally a bad idea. Good example of that is something that happened at Amazon a couple of years ago with their HR recruitment. They were trying to train data on how they were recruiting. It became a huge mess because it was actually causing issues with how they were selecting candidates. And instead of trying to fix biases, it was actually making these biases even more seen in the process. And so speed for the matter of speed, it's really not generally a good idea. And this is the way we should be looking at it, is combining speed with governance and with how do we look at it from an ethical standpoint should be part of our day-to-day, the same as we have DevSecOps today. It wasn't the way in the past. Today it's part of how we do engineering. We need to look at it in the same way. So looking at how are you going to take the data? Is it in an ethical manner? How much data it is, how the data look like, does it actually representative of everything that you want to achieve? Because if you're just gonna go fast, then you might actually lose on the actual goal you want to achieve. And so you have to take the data and ensure that it's actually meaningful. Another way of doing it, and this is something that we are doing with my teams as well, is we have an actual panel that we review how AI is being used, how AI is actually helping us and not making sure it's not going to go over someone else day to day and then just being not replaced, but making that person obsolete. So having someone part of the loop, even if AI is super powerful and can be doing that, you might want to make sure you have someone in the middle, someone that will be able to govern that output and not just jump into having it doing everything. So we're seeing that a lot with agents. So yeah, I will say trying to find the right balance because it's not really a binary choice.
So I hear balance is important. It's hard to find it. And you kind of need to have a right framework in mind and in place. So what does that framework look like? How does one balance? How does one make it effective? What has worked for yourselves in your organizations, but also maybe for some of your clients?
I'll start with that one. I think one of the most important things is to really think about, your competitors are going to touch it even if you don't touch it, or B, adversaries. So we were not really talking much about security and AI in that intersection in this course, but that's actually in this conference so far. But that's, I think, one of the most important things that we need to align ourselves with, really working with security personnel When we talk about incidents for cybersecurity, we're going to see a lot more AI incidents, and we have to think about very similar frameworks, very similar practices that are integrated across your organization to really respond to that perspective. But in order to really understand what are the potential AI incidents that are going to come down the line, you have to be able to play with it in the context of your organization. And how do you do that thoughtfully with a very thoughtful user base as your first trial? So how do you identify your potential expert users when you're going to play with a new technology so that you can understand the risks, and they're going to be the first on the front line to identify those risks as they're playing with it. We're dealing with probabilistic systems here. It's not about if this is going to go wrong, it's when it's going to go wrong and how do we know it went wrong.
So I heard data, I heard user base, I heard cybersecurity. What else? Valence, do you want to?
Yeah. For me, it's always about, first, does everyone understand the nature of governance in the first place, which I find is not common. Its intent isn't to slow you down or speed you up, it's to enable you to get to what you're aiming for. So the whole idea isn't to, how do I balance governance and innovation, is how do I weave governance into the work I do so I innovate with that in mind. I execute governance as I innovate, then it doesn't constrain you, but it puts boundaries around the dangers that can come from this. And there are dangers in this. It's not just a security risk, it's pure on uncertainty and risk. When you have levels of danger you cannot understand, you better have some governing mechanisms to handle that. Because if you don't, that's what leads you down the path to disaster. So when I'm dealing with something that has unknowable consequences, I have to have means of governing it and ethics in my structures and all these things built into how I do work. So if you govern effectively for what it's supposed to do, make sure I have guardrails, make sure I understand who's accountable, make sure I have those elements in place, you can actually weave that through. The problem we usually have is we try to spin up AI governance, data governance. We keep breaking them out. They operate together. You govern as a unit, you weave them together, and then you govern effectively across all domains. The breaking and the siloing of it is actually dangerous. And something we actually need to stop doing.
So that's interesting. So you're advocating for sort of one governance for a lot of different technologies in the enterprise, right?
Absolutely.
So it's the same people who are doing, I don't know, IT governance, or
Yep. They were never separate
data governance
things.
should be doing also in charge of AI.
When IT governance was formed, it wasn't IT governance of a department, it's information and technology governance of information and technology. That includes data and any new tech. It was built for that. And then it got spread out and separated out into separate things. But if you ever look at how they're built, they still foundationally tie together. Why am I going to build a governance structure for AI that's separate from my governance structure for regular strategy, my governance for this? They're going to conflict. They're going to create accountability problems. They're going to create all types of challenges you're going to have to rationalize. And for all of what's happening with AI, that flow, I have to keep them all aligned or else that governance will destroy the things I'm doing. The more bodies I have, the more integrations I have to keep them aligned to make governance work.
So I see lots of heads nodding, so it sounds like we all agree with that, yeah? Awesome, awesome. So, okay, so one governance, regardless of whether it's technology, information, AI, or your old-fashioned whatever technology you want to choose. I'm tongue-in-cheek. So we talked about data, we talked about cybersecurity, we talked about, unifying models. What else have we not touched about governance? Yeah? Sorry, Fion.
I would say the legal compliance aspect
yes.
of where the world of AI is heading. So people think like regulations is going to slow down innovation, but the other side of the argument is, can we really trust people self-govern, right? So one of the examples I like to use is cars, right? No matter how many times you test a car, once it goes on the road, there's still what we call residual risk. That's why there's seatbelt and airbag, and there's traffic signal regulations to make sure people follow rules and reduce accident. And I feel like AI is one of those technology. You can test as many times as you like. Before it goes to production, there are still going to be residual risk. And that's why people put in safety guardrails that are code level. There are now policy guardrails. If you see why Google, Microsoft, Apple, they're all changing their acceptable use terms of use, is because they are now putting in what they call policy guardrails, right? They're not responsible, liable if you're using their AI outside of their intended purposes. And that's why our government and governments around the world are also talking about AI regulations.
So I want to park the questions about regulations for a bit later because I do want to dive a bit deeper into governance. And you mentioned accountability, responsibility, and bringing this excellent car example. So when cars crash and something happens, an accident, right, and a person is injured, we know what happens and we know who's accountable, right? But in terms of in AI, in the world of AI, who is accountable when things go wrong? And where does that accountability, responsibility fall? Is it development teams? Is it leadership teams? Is it, your supplier from whom you got that trained model? Like what happens? Like where is that accountability? Himanshu,
I think it should be a common responsibility, right? So the recent protocols of RSP, responsible scaling policies, a lot of companies are following it. Anthropic is one of them. So they would, like when Claude 4 was released, there were issues when Claude 4 refused to shut down and was trying to blackmail the engineer. Anthropic came up and made this particular incident public, to the knowledge of public, that this is the ASL level 3, it has reached safety level 3. So I think these kind of disclosures would only allow users as well as vendors and larger corporations to understand what are the realms of alignment and safety. And sometimes, as we all know, safety and alignment with AI has both internal and external misalignment. And it's a continuous improvement function, especially with GenAI models, because they start to have a lot of data drift, model drift. So I think it's a call for collective. It cannot be just pinpointed at one, but for sure, it should start from design stage that we build in these governance frameworks, these safety measures right in the beginning, so that the data all the points which we talked about gets accordingly aligned to create solutions which are ethical, safe for all humans. If they are safe for us here, they should be also safe for people sitting 2,000 miles apart from here.
So I agree, but I want to push a bit further. So collective sounds great, and I think we all agree, but what does it translate to in reality? When something bad happens, right, and your customers are negatively impacted, or maybe whole communities, your CIOs, whatever executive name is on the news, like who takes responsibility for that? Is it your vendor? You mentioned, and I know some vendors, for example, indemnify for different risks and harms, but what happens? Because it's ultimately, your organization, maybe not your specific, but it's an organization who deployed that solution. Who's responsible?
One thing, I'm actually vehemently against the idea that we're all responsible.
Okay.
I think that that's so problematic. I think what's important is to identify and to codify what does the organization believe as their core values on how they're going to approach this technology. You start seeing, if you Google AI principles, insert X company, AI pillars, AI like core values, there's a lot of terminology for this that's out there in the ether, but it's really what it is defining your core values as an organization, similar to a mission or vision statement, and how are we going to approach this technology, and what are the core important lenses or ways of viewing this technology that we're going to make sure we're aligning to. And that's the collective part. That's the part that the whole organization needs to align to, need to understand that how you're building AI, whatever your little team building somewhere, the innovation squad that an organization forgets exists, what are the core values does that organization, does that little team need to abide by? Furthermore, there needs to be an actual person somewhere high up in the organization, and where this person is going to be called, what are they doing, who are they, and what level they're going to be might be different for different organizations, but it's someone that owns and is responsible for constantly identifying what are the AI risks that are going to be going to be impacting my organization. Knowing that with AI risk, we traditionally think about risk as not just what is the risk, what is the impact, but what is the likelihood. In AI, we don't know what this damn likelihood is. What we do know is that there's a lot of these possible risks. Together, any one of these risks, the likelihood of it happening is actually very, very high. So how do we proactively identify those risks? What are the exact practices and policies that need to be in place across the organization that uphold our publicly stated core values, mission, pillars, principles, statements? And that we have an aligned understanding across all the products, all the vendors that we're dealing with, that we have to make sure they're accountable and showcasing that they're accountable to our values and living up to our values if we want us to buy your stuff.
Can I add a little bit to that?
Please, yes.
There's a couple of elements there. One, it's definitely going to be a layered governance because you're going to govern different aspects in different ways. So the accountability is going to fly depending on elements. Now, you should have some guiding principles. So I want to keep you in alignment with these things as an organization. When I develop, I'm in this space. But I will come to sort of an honesty element, which is most people don't actually act on their values. Organizations act on their values until it's inconvenient in a lot of cases. So if I'm going to hold you to your value system, how many companies have you been with that the second it's inconvenient, they stop doing it? So the reality is you can't trust people to hold to their values when there's financial pressures, when there's competition. People will throw that to the side and do it every single day. So you have to look at it differently because your principles will not hold unless you mean them. And a lot of companies, your values are a nice thing you put on the wall and never act on. So one, governance is going to distribute. We know it's going to have to look different. Two, you can't trust principles in and of yourself. You have to have mechanisms to actually enforce them. And that goes to assurance and actually treating that as something that's not being done to you, but done for you. We make sure we do what we say we're going to do. We put mechanisms in place to allow us to govern that effectively, and we have consequences when we don't. In a lot of places, there are no consequences, no one's accountable, no one's, it was somebody else. If your organization doesn't have consequences, doesn't have structure around that, and it doesn't have to be rigid, there's a difference between a constraint that's hard and not. But if you do not have something that allows you to flex around that and something that holds you to your principles, it doesn't matter what you say. We know that.
So
do you mind if I make this more complicated?
Please, go ahead.
Yeah.
So we've talked about having people actually helping and governing and the legal team being involved and having these policies in place. What you brought up about Google having these policy changes and you have to adhere by them. I can actually bring up an example of what we've done in Loblaw. One thing is we've created actually a governance framework that is driven by AI. And so the team obviously is, a young team. They love to do cool stuff. So they've called that agent Commissioner Gordon. Yes. And that agent is actually in charge of going through content that is being generated by LLMs, and then based on that being able to flag issues, and then only reporting to a specific group of people of something is happening. It's more complicated because now, who is also commissioning the Commissioner Gordon?
Well, you have to go back to the other point, which is we talk very much about risk as, okay, we know these, we're going to deal with these.
Exactly.
There's a fair amount of risk in AI that is unknown, unknowable, and absolutely deep in uncertainty. You cannot know. You cannot predict.
Yep.
I don't know what the impact is. I don't know what the likelihood is. I have no idea this could happen. We've seen that with generative on its own. It started manifesting things we didn't know could happen until it hit the real world, and dynamics you can't conceive of hit them in real time. And those dynamics are moving. So the idea that we can actually understand the risks that are going to apply and just plan for them is a notion we have to get out of our heads as well. There's a certain amount of unknowable uncertainty that is going to apply to the way AI develops as it learns. We do not know the factors that will hit it, so we have to actually build for resilience, build for different skills in the organizations, because you're not going to know the risk you're facing. Some of those are going to be unknowable and will not even manifest until they do. The conditions have to be exactly right, and in that moment it will be an emergent risk. You couldn't see it coming until it happens. So if you realize that that's a possibility, governance and all this aspect has to be deeply embedded because you cannot plan for that anymore.
Just wanted to add one thing. To have that kind of approach, I think it requires more and more tools to be available to people who do not have the access to them. So I think on Friday, some of the members of our team, they presented a tool like that, which allows now to map different risks which can happen if you actually...
That's the RES AI tool you spoke on, your team spoke on Friday, right?
Yes, okay. And now you can use it, it's open source available. So at least, let's say you as a leader, you are contemplating to have an AI chatbot for your bank or for your company. You can just, in natural language, prompt it asking that, okay, I'm launching it and it's customer facing. What are the risks as per different promulgated risk repositories? It sources from a risk repository which has some 1,700 risk right now. Yeah. Then it maps it to the NIST framework or EOAI Act or let's say whenever we have AIDA equivalent, it'll do that for that. And these are the mitigating actions. So that way, at a functional level or whatever level we are seeing it, we have this mapping available now. And then we take more informed risk and we start building it. So and I think the collective, what I meant was something what we do for cybersecurity, though there's a team to put hard and soft measures for cybersecurity. But me as a user of the cyberspace in my organization, I'm responsible to report phishing. I'm responsible to undertake those monthly, weekly trainings so that I'm generally aware of what's happening. Because like ransomware industry is makes, I think, millions or I think $1 billion+ every day. So that's what the collective could do, because all of us will have some or the other component of our life being touched by AI. So I think we'll need some more awareness to govern and use AI a little more ethically and responsibly.
Yeah, I don't see those two concepts mutually exclusive. I think they're just complementary and overlapping, right? And Valence, you wanted to add something?
All I was going to say is risk and uncertainty are not the same thing.
Yes.
And there's often a conflation that risk is a response to uncertainty as it affects you. Uncertainty is just uncertainty. It's positive, it's negative, it's whatever it is. So you got to be really careful about thinking risk deals with uncertainty. Risk deals with yours if you understand it. If you don't, you have no clue what that uncertainty looks like. You can't really execute risk practices against it very well. Sorry.
I agree, but I think like model risk management practice, which I know a lot of you are from the banking sector, right? You can stress test, scenario test to minimize the uncertainty. Definitely not eliminate, but you can minimize them, right?
You can minimize knowable uncertainty.
On that, I really have to add, within the idea of knowable or unknowable uncertainty or risk, I completely agree. The thing that I think that we don't understand, and we have to shift this paradigm of, is subjectivity versus objectivity.
Correct. Yeah.
When we are special, don't get me started on accuracy scores in traditional ML. I can grant to you all on why all of your accuracy scores are absolutely a false indicator, to put it mildly, at any point you want me to do so for your specific use case. Happy to do that. That was already a problem with traditional ML. We're now with generative and agentic AI. It's not just did it do what we expected, we do it as well as we expect. And if we do not have a very codified understanding of what is performance and how is it qualitative, not quantitative, don't get me started. You give me a quantitative metric, I'll tell you why it's a false indicator. Over and over and over again. If you are not bringing in your user experience researchers, if you are not bringing in your qualitative, empathetic professionals into the room from the onset and throughout your entire development cycle, your AI is not only going to be unusable, like forget about the whole stat everyone will pull from the ether of like 80%, 90%, 97% of AI projects fail. I can tell you why that is. The long-term implications of your AI without bringing these professionals in are going to open you up for a lot of potential regulation and a lot of downstream effects that are going to be impactful negatively to your users and or others within the periphery of your system as well.
So Mayan, you brought up agentic. I'm glad you did, because we can talk for a long time and you can hear the debate here, right? And lots of good advice too. But as AI system, I mean, agentic is top of everybody's mind, right? And as systems, AI system become more autonomous, more agentic, does governance need to change too? Like, what does it look like? Do you want to start?
Yeah. So we are seeing a profound change. We had AI systems which could perform, which could generate. Now we have AI systems which can act. And that requires a little shift in thinking, because till the time it was just a prompt, a code got generated, an image got generated, it's fine. I mean, you can just discard it. Just imagine that there are systems which are now autonomously taking actions, taking decisions on your behalf, interacting with systems and humans when we sleep, right? So it requires a different approach. So the approach would be, which I would call an agentic AI governance by design itself. So instead of an afterthought of governance, that now the product is there, vendor is delivered, let me now build some responsible governance on top. Let's start thinking of governance right from the scratch, from the drawing board, when we are thinking and conceptualizing that, okay, we are building a multi-agent system, or we will have this particular system built into this particular module, right? And why it is important? Because unlike the traditional machine learning, where we would have audit once in a quarter, over here, we have systems which are actually real-time action generators. And if we do not think of tools which will allow us to do something like a circuit breaker, and we just think of a content filter, I think we'll have a lot of consequences. Because consequence of an action can result in a lot of things which would be detrimental to the business, perhaps can be detrimental to life. And then comes multi-agentic systems which are working in conjunction with each other. Earlier, we were thinking of an individual ML system or generative AI system which you were generally governing, taking control of. Now, there are research available which would say that when multi-agent systems will collaborate or do not collaborate together, they will have different behavior, right? How do you monitor that? Another example would be, because these systems are working continuously, you cannot have Monday morning report going to the CEO at 9 a.m. and this is how the system is, but you will require real-time monitoring and real-time options where if there's a requirement to have an emergency stop, you can stop the train. You do not want it to kind of have a system where it's like out of control. So that's why I'll call upon all of us as humans to take that check or having a firewall, which is like human dignity firewall. Certain decisions should not be automated. It could be perhaps employment decision. Should I employ this person or not? It should this person go to ER or should it be discharged today? or these things should remain human, not even human in the loop. It should not get automated because it should not be. But at the same time, automation can definitely help our industry evolve a lot. So this problem which we always face, and whenever you come together in these conferences, people will talk about there is a trust deficit in AI. There's a problem of governance. So I think they both can go hand in hand. And when they come together, trust and governance together, I think we can build systems which are built for trust and governance right from design, than being reactive in an afterthought. So that's what I would say. That's why we need a different approach for this.
Quick thing. I think nothing really changes. I think the emphasis changes.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we have a lot of governance capabilities in our organizations is great. The quality of those governance organizations procedures are going to become very obvious as soon as you're trying to touch agentic AI. But I think what's really behooves us the most is to go back to engineering principles. Like engineering, get your size. I just did a whole diatribe of getting your user experience folks in the room, but also get your actual systems engineers, those that are PNGs, or going for the PNGs. There's a whole ethical understanding of a system and how you think about a system. Redundancies is really important, and also making sure that you understand who is making what decision, and making sure that those items are documented, and you can actually think about the human oversight, to your point of human in the loop, the overwriting in automatic decision that was done by a probabilistic system. So someone is going to have to eventually overwrite that decision, making sure you understand when a decision happens, so your feedback mechanisms, and also, now I'm forgetting.
I have a thought.
But redundancy and thinking about aerospace, the reason why we spoke about cars, but aerospace in particular, airplanes are even safer than cars, and the reason for it, they have redundant on top of redundant on top of redundant systems. Obviously, different systems based on the potential implications and scope are going to have different levels of redundancy that are going to be required, but that needs to be thought of from the onset.
So, can I add,
You have 10 seconds.
One, you're going to have to be adaptive. It's going to change as you go. There's no set state. This is going to have to work this way until it doesn't. And you're going to keep flowing through it. And you're going to have to, of all those elements that we're talking about, you're going to have humans, because agentic right now, do you trust that it's going to make a good decision? Do you understand how? And I'll add one last element. Do you even understand how you make a decision? If you don't get how you make it, you don't understand how it makes a decision. And can you trust what it does in complexity? So far, the answer is no. So if you're going to have that, you're going to have layers upon layers of governance that are going to flow and shift as you need them, and you're going to have to design it to flex. If it's static, it will not work.
So it's like a living, breathing organism.
It is going to be living and breathing and reactive in its nature.
Thinking.